get back to economy. Sir, this seat isn't for your kind. 8 words. Cold, sharp, final. Flight attendant Camila Torres didn't blink as she leveled that statement in the face of a man in jeans and a plain white t-shirt. No hesitation, no courtesy, just judgment at 35,000 feet before the plane even left the ground. It was 10:01 a.m. aboard SkyPulse flight SP-204 out of LAX. The man, black, bearded, silent, simply stood there. Not arguing, not apologizing, not flinching, because in exactly 15 minutes, Camila, her co-attendant, the captain, and one other crew member would no longer be employed. What they didn't know, what they never even bothered to check, was that the man they tried to eject from seat 1A was John Marshall, not just a passenger, but the founder, chairman, and CEO of SkyPulse Airlines. And this wasn't just a flight. It was an audit in disguise. Before we dive deeper into this explosive moment of power, prejudice, and public reckoning, drop your city or country in the comments and hit subscribe if you believe truth travels faster than silence. Because this story, it's not just about a seat. It's about who they tried to erase and who refused to disappear. John Marshall didn't look like a billionaire. He wore no watch, no monogrammed cufflinks, no tailored blazer screaming wealth, just a plain white t-shirt, jeans, sneakers, and a stare honed from decades of watching systems expose themselves. As he boarded SkyPulse flight SP-204 at LAX that morning, he carried nothing but a small leather bag and a memory one too many complaints that had gone unresolved. Discrimination, downgrades, bribes, staff who looked the other way or took money to look away. John had built SkyPulse Airlines from scratch, turning a boutique regional carrier into a transcontinental giant. But as chairman and CEO, he'd become too far removed from the gate. The suits and reports made everything look clean. But the cabin told a different story. Next to him walked his executive assistant, Layla Carter, razor sharp, dressed in black, phone quietly recording from the side slit of her blazer pocket. This wasn't a stunt. It was evidence collection. John didn't board to be seen. He boarded to see. Camila Torres barely looked up when he presented his platinum boarding pass. She simply glanced at his outfit, then at Olivia Wentworth. Olivia, a Chanel-draped legacy member in her 50s, had already slid a crisp envelope of $100 bills into her open passport. "I believe I'm in 1A," she said, with polished ease. "The airline upgraded me. He can sit wherever his kind usually goes." Camila smirked. Didn't scan anything. Didn't check the manifest. Just snapped. "Sir, get back to economy." John raised the boarding pass again. 1A. Paid. Confirmed. Aiden Brooks, the second attendant. Barely looked up. Payment glitch flagged your name. System override. Card declined. It was a lie. The system had crashed at 9:55 am, freezing premium bookings. But John's ticket was real and valid. Layla had submitted the override from HQ. They had receipts, screenshots, logs. None of that mattered. Because what Camila and Aiden saw wasn't a platinum ticket. It was skin. It was simplicity. It was someone who didn't look the part. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Let's not make this complicated. I'm a legacy donor. I have lunch with SkyPulse East Coast execs." Camila turned and smiled. "Understood. Ms. Wentworth." Then to John, step aside, or I'll have you removed. In 3B, a quiet man named Michael Grayson watched. In 2C, independent journalist Grace Kim had already hit record. John didn't raise his voice. He just said, "You're going to regret this moment." Camilla leaned in close. "You're holding up priority boarding." "Move it," Aiden chimed in. "You don't look like first class." Olivia added, "You certainly don't dress like it." John's voice didn't rise. It deepened. "Is first class sold by fabric or by character?" Olivia laughed. "It's sold to people who belong. Clearly, you don't." Grace Kim zoomed in on Olivia's envelope. "Can you repeat that?" she asked. The audience at home would love to hear it again. The dramatic high point came when Camilla grabbed John's boarding pass and crumpled it in her hand. "You'll thank us," she said smugly, "when you're back where you belong." The cabin shifted. You could feel it like altitude pressure before a storm. John stayed calm, turned to Layla. "All being recorded," he asked. "Audio, visual, multiple witness streams," she replied. Then he turned back to Camilla and whispered, 15 minutes from now, your badge won't work." Camilla's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" John said nothing more. "Just don't excuse anything. Just watch." Passengers shifted. Whispers spread. But Camilla doubled down. "Miss Wentworth has made a generous contribution to SkyPulse. She's cleared for 1A. You need to move now." Aiden jabbed at the tablet. "Seats pending. He's not officially cleared." Olivia reclined slightly, fanning herself with the boarding stub. "Are we still talking about this?" she said. "Just escort him out." John stayed rooted. "My ticket's valid. I boarded early. The system glitched. But you're choosing to let money speak louder than facts." Olivia scoffed. "Should I add another 1,000 to help move this along?" She dangled a fresh $100 bill. That's when Michael Grayson stood. "That's enough," he said. "You're bribing staff in front of witnesses." Camilla snapped. "Sit down, or I'll have you removed." Grace spoke next, voice calm and firm. "You're threatening passengers for objecting to corruption. The camera stays on." Layla turned to John. "They've buried themselves." He nodded. "Let them." Camilla Torres's confidence didn't crack. Not yet. Her uniform was starched. Her tone was steel. But something beneath her composure had started to fracture because the man in seat 1A wasn't arguing. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't retreating. He was documenting. And everyone knew it. Grace Kim's camera didn't blink. Neither did John. Layla Carter stood firm beside him, her phone capturing every word, every expression, every second of bias wrapped in official procedure. Camilla stepped forward, shoes clicking like a metronome of arrogance. "Show me your ID." "Sir, if you're going to keep pretending you belong in this seat, prove it." John didn't even shift. He stayed seated, eyes locked on hers. "Did you ask Olivia for hers?" Camilla's mouth twitched. "She's verified." "No," John said. "She offered you cash. You accepted. Now you're demanding documents from the man whose name was printed on the manifest before the glitch." Aiden Brooks hovered behind her, pretending to check his tablet. But the screen told a different story. The override had come through. The manifest now showed John Marshall, seat 1A confirmed. He just hadn't told Camilla yet. Because he was waiting. Waiting for them to commit to the lie. Overhead, the voice of Captain Jacob Hayes broke in. If the passenger in 1A is not on the manifest, the crew is authorized to reseat him to preserve premium order. Layla leaned in to John. Updates live at HQ. They'll get it any second. John nodded slowly. To Aiden, he said, when the update arrives, I expect your apology loud enough for the cabin to hear. Olivia Wentworth scoffed. Do you really think any of us care what you hear? Camilla pressed forward. Last warning. Move or face security. Ms. Wentworth is in 1A. John nodded again. Calm. That's your final word. Camilla answered. Yes. Good. John turned to Grace's camera. Let it go on record, a confirmed passenger was denied his seat based on a tire and a cash bribe. The dramatic high point came seconds later. Grace took a step forward. Phone raised. Mr. Brooks, she said to Aiden. How much did Ms. Wentworth offer you? Aiden froze. What? She repeated it. The envelope. The money. What did she offer? He looked at Camilla, then at Olivia, then back at John, and then it happened. His voice cracked. $5,000. Silence sucked the air from the cabin. Michael Grayson whispered, Say that again. Aiden repeated. $5,000. She offered it. Said she couldn't miss her meeting. Said the guy in 1A wouldn't care. Olivia hissed. You idiot. Camilla gasped. You weren't supposed to say anything. Grace zoomed in. Thank you. Mr. Brooks. John turned to him. And you took it. Aiden mumbled. Camilla said it happened sometimes. For regulars. We thought, you were no one. Camilla turned on him instantly. You liar. Aiden shot back. You said she'd tip. You said she was connected. You promised it'd be fine. Olivia shrieked. Don't drag me into this mess. Layla's voice came through sharp as a bell. All audio logged. HQ has the feed. Admission confirmed. John looked at Camilla. You sold a seat that wasn't yours to sell. You let a passenger buy her way past dignity. Camilla trembled. I was following the situation. No, John said. You were following her cash. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric. Passengers looked at each other, shifting uncomfortably. One woman clutched her husband's arm. Another teen in row 5 whispered, Is this really happening? Layla stepped forward. HQ manifest now live. Seat 1A, John Marshall confirmed. Authorized. Paid in full. John didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply said, You wanted to remove me from a seat I paid for, on an airline I built, because I didn't look expensive enough to matter. And you did it in public, on camera, backed by a bribe. Camilla turned toward the cockpit. Captain? But Captain Hayes didn't reply. The cabin had become a courtroom, and the verdict was forming. Grace lowered her phone just enough to whisper, This footage, it's going to change everything. John sat back in 1A like he'd never been challenged. Not as a power move, as a reminder that respect isn't dressed in silk or stitched into suits. It's earned by not moving when you know you belong. Camilla's voice cracked. Show me your ID. Still trying. Still clawing. Still blind to the disaster unfolding around her. John didn't move, but he looked her dead in the eye. "You'll have your proof in less than 5 minutes." Camila Torres stood center aisle, voice sharp as glass. "ID, now!" Her demand cracked through the cabin like thunder. Every eye turned toward the man in 1A. Even passengers who had tried to stay neutral now leaned forward. Alert. John Marshall didn't move, didn't blink. He simply turned to Layla. Time. She glanced at her screen. 10:08 a. 7 minutes since her first demand. All recorded. HQ alert, already sent. John nodded. Good. Keep filming. Across the aisle. Grace Kim remained upright. Phone steady. Her voice rising over the rising tension. This is being documented. Bribery. Reassignment. Internal override suppression. Not a misunderstanding fraud. Aiden Brooks looked like a man unraveling. She said it was protocol. He mumbled. She told me to block the manifest update. Camilla spun toward him, betrayal flashing across her face. You're seriously throwing me under the bus. You told me they always bend for Olivia. Aiden shot back. You said it gets handled behind the scenes. John raised a hand, not to silence, but to center. Let's settle this now. He turned to the passengers. Check the original manifest. Pull the override logs. Confirm the glitch timestamp. It will all show exactly when and how my seat was reassigned. The dramatic high point came seconds later when Camilla said the one thing she should have never said aloud. We had a verbal protocol. Murmurs erupted. Aiden's head snapped up. Olivia's smirk vanished. Camilla continued, breath short, words tumbling faster than she could catch them. It wasn't written. Okay, but it was real. If a high-value passenger tipped and the other person didn't look like they belonged, we were allowed to shift them, quietly, for cabin harmony. The silence that followed was seismic. Grace whispered, "That just crossed the line." Michael Grayson from 3B leaned forward. "How many people have you done this to?" Camilla stammered. I thought it was harmless. We're told to protect the image of first class." John stood slowly from seat 1A. "Protect what?" "Exactly," he asked. He swept a gaze across the cabin, the color of the seat, or the color of the passenger. At that moment, the intercom crackled. Captain Hayes returned, but his voice, once calm, was now unsteady. "Cabin crew, stabilize the situation. De-escalation is advised." John raised an eyebrow. "Captain Hayes," he called toward the cockpit. "Why not join us?" "Say it out loud. Tell them who approved this override." Silence. Passengers turned. No one spoke. Hayes did not appear. But his absence spoke volumes. Layla tapped her earpiece. "Sir, Amelia Grant is live, confirming full HR authority." John nodded. "Then let's make it official." He faced the crew, Camilla Torres, Aiden Brooks, Jacob Hayes, Aaron Lusk. He glanced down at Layla's screen. All 4 submitted for termination, effective immediately. Gasps. Real ones. Audible. Sharp. Camilla's eyes widened. "You can't." John cut her off. "I just did," Michael muttered. "Did he just?" Grace whispered. "He owns the airline." Camilla reeled. "Wait. Who the hell are you?" John exhaled, and with that, He stood tall, removed his glasses, and slowly peeled away the thick disguise of a travel beard. The cabin rippled in disbelief. Gone was the anonymous man in a t-shirt. Standing in his place, John Marshall, founder, chairman, CEO. Olivia's face went white. Camilla took a step back. Aiden stared like he'd just been hit by a hurricane. Grace captured it all, the transformation, the truth, the moment the lie imploded. John spoke slowly, deliberately. You tried to remove a man from his rightful seat on a plane he paid for because he didn't look the way you expected. He turned to Olivia. You bribed your way into a seat and called it a donation. To Camilla, you enforced a fake protocol and then hid behind authority you never earned. To Aiden, you let silence become your co-pilot. And to the rest of the cabin, this is not about appearance. It's about accountability. Layla added firmly, termination submitted, documentation live, all badge access revoked. Amelia Grant has confirmed HR alignment. Grace's phone caught every word. Michael whispered, this just became case law. John sat back down in 1A, not out of victory, but clarity. We're not here to fly above problems, he said. We're here to land in truth. And that truth. It had just taken off. Camilla Torres was frozen in place, her lips slightly parted, her hands twitching as if trying to grip a reality that was already slipping away. She had just discovered that the man she humiliated owned everything she stood on, from the name embroidered on the uniforms to the seats she thought she controlled. John Marshall had built it all. And he was done watching it rot from the inside. Aiden Brooks collapsed into the jump seat, eyes vacant. Olivia Wentworth, once all diamonds and privilege, now looked like a ghost draped in silk. Her jaw trembled. Her fingers clutched her purse not for security, but for denial. But it wasn't just their world that had changed. The entire cabin had shifted. The quiet passengers, the ones who had watched with downturned eyes, now stared openly. Some with anger, some with disbelief, some with recognition. Michael Grayson stood again, voice calm but forceful. This wasn't about one seat. This was about what you thought that seat meant. Grace Kim kept filming. You treated him like he didn't belong because he didn't signal wealth the way you wanted. You sold comfort to the loudest wallet, and now you're caught. Camilla's voice cracked. I didn't know. That's the point. John interrupted. You never asked. You never verified. You saw clothing and made a judgment. Layla's voice cut in, clinical and exact. Manifest override logs confirm crew panel access initiated at 9:56 a.m. by staff ID registered to Torres. System update blocked until 10:07 a.m. This delay resulted in 3 verified seat reassignments. Camilla whispered, I thought I'd fix it after takeoff. Aiden leaned forward. You said no one would notice. You agreed, she snapped. You said it's how things work. You said if we bumped a guy in a hoodie, no one would care. Then came the dramatic high point. A quiet voice from 4D. An elderly man, African American, eyes tired but fierce. He stood and raised a shaking hand. My name is Donald Ray. I flew for SkyPulse for 11 years, retired last spring. The cabin hushed. I knew about this, not by code names or manifest numbers, but by silence. I saw the reassignments, the quiet upgrades, and I said nothing. John looked at him. Donald continued. I watched men who looked like me bump to the back, told there was a mix-up, told their card failed, told their name wasn't on the list. I thought staying quiet protected my pension, but it only protected the rot. A breath. I was wrong. The entire cabin froze. It wasn't just John who had something to say now. It was everyone. Camilla sat down, slowly, shaken. Aiden looked toward the cockpit. Captain Hayes still hadn't emerged. Not a word, not a sound. Because even in uniform, cowardice can hide behind doors. Olivia barked out. You think this ends with us? You think we're the only ones? John nodded. No, I think you were the loudest. Not the first. Grace panned her camera toward Olivia. So who else bought silence? Olivia didn't answer. She simply turned her face away. John stood again, this time addressing the cabin directly. For years, I let SkyPulse grow fast, too fast. We focused on numbers, on routes, on luxury, but we didn't focus on culture. He scanned the faces, every class, every row. That stops today. Layla stepped forward, effective immediately. We are launching the Pulse Equity Initiative. Every crew member from gate agents to senior flight staff will undergo mandatory training. Internal systems will be rebuilt, bribe protections removed, passenger complaints re-reviewed. John continued, if you've ever filed a complaint and were ignored, expect a call. If you've ever been treated as if your appearance discounted your worth, expect an apology. Michael muttered. Is this really happening? Grace whispered. This is the first time I've ever seen a CEO stand instead of spin. Then John walked slowly to the front of the cabin and spoke one final line before sitting again. Equity doesn't fly standby. It belongs in seat 1A every single time. The cabin remained silent. Not from fear, from awe. Gate 47B at LAX hadn't seen this kind of traffic since the airport's expansion. 3 security officers stood by, waiting for instructions. Not from the captain, not from the flight attendants. They were waiting on the man seated calmly in 1A John Marshall, the CEO of the very airline they were sent to resolve. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere had turned from tension to transformation. The passengers were no longer bystanders. They were witnesses. Camilla Torres clung to the jump seat, her lips moving silently as she stared at nothing. Aiden Brooks hadn't spoken in 5 minutes, just stared at the tablet screen, now displaying the manifest update that confirmed exactly what John said from the beginning. John Marshall, seat 1A, cleared, paid, overridden manually. Olivia Wentworth was gone, escorted out by airport police. Her last words, "You'll regret this." John hadn't flinched, because regret belongs to those who hide. He had come to expose. In the front galley, Layla Carter was on a live call with Amelia Grant from SkyPulse HR. Documents were being filed in real time. The terminations were already processing. Camilla Torres, terminated. Aiden Brooks, terminated. Jacob Hayes, relieved of command. Aaron Lusk, complicit in override execution, terminated. Not suspended, terminated. John stood again, his voice never rising above normal volume. Ladies and gentlemen, The staff responsible for this misconduct have been removed. This flight will not proceed until a new crew is assigned. No one else on this aircraft will be humiliated today." A light murmur passed through the cabin. Applause didn't erupt, but it built, slow and meaningful. From the back, from the side, from rows 3A, 6C, and 7B. One clap, then two, then a quiet chorus of dignity reclaimed. The dramatic high point came when Grace Kim camera, still rolling, stood in the aisle. "I've covered inequality in housing, healthcare, and education. But I've never seen something like this where discrimination, bribery, and silence were torn apart in real time by the very person who was supposed to be ignored." She turned to John. "You didn't just expose a broken system. You made it answer." She paused, then added, "And if you're launching something new, I want in." John smiled for the first time. "Then you already are." Layla stepped forward. "We're calling it the Pulse Equity Initiative. Beginning tomorrow, all 7,200 employees will undergo equity-centered training, and not just to check boxes. We're changing who's at the gate, who's making decisions, and how culture is protected, not purchased." Michael Grayson called out from row 3B. "I fly for work. Every week. You make this happen. You'll earn loyalty the right way, not with points, but with principles." John nodded. "That's the only kind of loyalty I want." Behind him, Donald Ray, the retired flight leader who had earlier confessed to his silence, stood again. "If you'll have me," he said, "I want to help train the new hires. Not as a crew member, but as someone who lived through both the best and worst of this airline." John nodded. "You're hired. No paperwork. No background check." The truth was enough. Camilla, pale and blinking, finally spoke. "You think this ends with me?" she said, rising on unsteady feet. "I wasn't the only one. I wasn't even the worst one." John didn't blink. "Then give me names." Camilla hesitated. Then, breath-shaking, she said, "There's a group, internal, crew-only Slack channel. They call it the Priority Quiet Board. Off the books, not on servers." Layla looked up sharply. "We'll need full forensic review." Camilla continued. "They share tips, how much money buys silence, who to bump based on vibe mismatches. They call it adjusted elegance. Started as jokes, became orders." The cabin gasped. Even seasoned flyers, men in suits, women in heels, looked sick, because what started as whispers had turned into a machine. A systematic bias with its own code, slang, and procedure. John's tone turned to steel. "You had choices," Camilla whispered. "I was already on probation. Jacob said if I didn't play along, I'd lose everything." And now John asked, "I lost everything anyway," she muttered. "No," John said. "You lost it the moment you let bribery matter more than boarding passes." Layla raised her voice for the cabin. "New protocols launch in 24 hours. All past complaints will be reviewed. Bias incidents reopened. Misconduct readdressed." John turned to the passengers. "This isn't about punishing 4 people. This is about exposing a culture that lets dignity become optional." He sat back down in 1A. Layla whispered, "Board reports show unanimous support for the reform." "You did it," John replied, low and firm. "Now we rebuild." Flight SP-204 sat motionless on the tarmac. Not delayed, suspended. Inside the cabin, the energy had transformed, not just from tension to accountability, but from silence to confession. Passengers weren't just watching, they were listening, learning, and Camila Torres, shaken, dismissed, but still standing, had one more revelation to offer. "I didn't invent the system," she began, her voice raw. "I just survived it." Layla glanced toward John. He gave her a single nod, permission to let Camilla speak. "There's a reason these things kept happening," Camilla said. The Slack group. The quiet upgrades. The envelope trades. It wasn't isolated. She looked around the cabin. They told us to prioritize experience, to keep premium happy, but they never said how. Aiden Brooks groaned from his seat. "Don't turn this into a TED Talk." But Camilla continued anyway. They called it cabin curation. Said if someone didn't match the luxury image, we had to discreetly relocate. I've seen passengers, usually black, sometimes Latinx, occasionally working-class white, moved because a donor wanted a clearer aisle, or because their sneakers lowered the visual tone. Michael Grayson muttered, "Unreal." Grace Kim didn't lower her phone. She raised it higher. "Keep going," she said. "We're still recording." That's when Camilla snapped. "You think I wanted this job? You think I applied dreaming of pushing people down the aisle like furniture?" She turned toward John. I was barely holding it together. Rent, bills, 2 kids in community school, and HR wrote me up twice for uninviting presentation. I had to straighten my hair, wear lipstick shades that didn't darken the brand. Her voice trembled. They said if I didn't improve my vibe score, I'd be replaced. John stayed silent. So did the rest of the cabin, because pain, even when tangled in guilt, still sounded like pain. Layla asked, "Who told you that?" Camilla exhaled. Flight Chief Jordan Monroe. He managed 3 West Coast hubs. He called it passenger vibe protection. Said some folks just clash with comfort. A dramatic high point followed. Camilla turned to Olivia's empty seat. "You think she's the only one who slipped cash? You think those envelopes weren't encouraged?" She scanned the cabin, desperate now not to defend herself, but to release something. They had a system for logging the bribes as donation discrepancies, even had a list of approved clients who could override boarding with on-site contributions. Olivia. She wasn't an exception. She was routine. John stood again, slowly, calmly. "Then give us the list." Camilla hesitated, then nodded. "I'll forward the names, the payments, the override logs, everything. If I'm going down, I'm not going alone." Layla turned toward the cabin. "Effective immediately, SkyPulse will begin a forensic audit of all non-manifest adjustments for the last 18 months. Every override, every envelope." Donald Ray, the retired leader, nodded from his seat. "It's long overdue." John faced the passengers. This system was built to smile at money and frown at difference. He turned toward the cockpit. And that smile started up there. The intercom crackled. But instead of a voice, they heard static. Then finally, "This is Captain Jacob Hayes." His voice was smaller now, less composed. "I didn't approve the bribes. Not directly. But I knew." He paused. "I told my crew to protect the experience. And I looked the other way when they protected the image instead. Grace whispered. That's it. That's the admission. Michael sat back in disbelief. How deep does this go? Layla replied without looking up. Deeper than we thought. But now we dig until there's daylight. John returned to 1A and opened his tablet. A single message from Amelia Grant. Full authority confirmed. Begin public audit. The board stands with you. He smiled faintly, not from joy, but from alignment. Camilla stepped back into the galley, no longer pleading, just empty. Do what you have to do, she muttered. John looked at her one last time. You made terrible choices, but speaking now, that's the first right one. Aiden didn't speak again. Not a word, not a defense. His silence now was its own kind of admission. The cabin had grown quiet, but not tense. This was surgical silence, the kind you hear right before healing begins. As the sun crept higher over Los Angeles International Airport, the plane still hadn't moved an inch, but inside, the real journey had already begun. John Marshall sat in 1A, back straight, face calm. He wasn't just a CEO reclaiming control. He was a man reclaiming integrity, not just for himself, but for every passenger who had ever been quietly displaced, doubted, or dismissed. Layla Carter's phone buzzed again. Amelia Grant had forwarded a batch of internal crew memos. Each contained language disguised as hospitality guidelines, but the implication was clear. If passenger appearance clashes with premium experience, reroute calmly and discreetly. Legacy donors are exempt from vibe policies. Prioritize clientele harmony over manifest rigidity. The rot wasn't just at the gate. It was in the language, baked into the culture, camouflaged as courtesy. Grace Kim looked visibly shaken. She'd filmed court hearings, labor strikes, civil protests. But what had just happened inside this airplane before it even took off felt more powerful than any of those. People will say this story is fake, she murmured. Too poetic, too clean, John replied without turning. That's what they said about every truth until it was recorded. Donald Ray nodded in quiet agreement. This plane may not leave today, he said, but something bigger just took off. That's when Layla raised her hand. Sir, she said to John, we've confirmed over 70 override instances matching the same pattern, all within the last 6 months, and 60% involved Black passengers. Murmurs, audible now, passengers exchanged glances. Some leaned toward windows. Some blinked hard. Because the numbers weren't just stats, they were stories. A dramatic high point followed as Layla read a quote from one complaint log aloud. Passenger appeared unfit for premium. Clothing lacked affluence cues. Reassigned to preserve cabin tone. Michael Grayson rose from his seat. That's me, he said. That's word for word what happened to me last November on Flight 102. They told me there was a system error. I spent the entire flight in coach, watching a man in a designer tracksuit take my seat. He wasn't yelling. He was remembering. And suddenly, others spoke too. A young Latina woman near the rear Flight 509 out of Miami. They said my luggage weight was over the limit and moved me to economy, but didn't weigh my bag. An older Asian man in 5C. They told me my meal selection wasn't on record and downgraded me mid-flight. I thought it was a mix-up. It wasn't. A white man in row 6. My wife's an executive. She flies Business Weekly. They bump her less when she wears a blazer. Every time she wears sweats, she's randomly rechecked. John listened to every voice. And when the wave of experiences settled into a thick, reflective quiet, he stood again. "We failed you," he said. "I failed you." He scanned the cabin not just for their faces, but their pain. Sky Pulse was supposed to fly above bias, and we didn't. We built wings but forgot who we were lifting. Layla stepped beside him. "That changes today." Grace lowered her camera for the first time in an hour. "This is no longer just a story," she said. "It's evidence." She looked at John. "You mind if I title the piece, 'The Flight That Didn't Move But Changed Everything'?" John gave her a small nod. "As long as you include the real departure from silence." Captain Jacob Hayes still hadn't emerged from the cockpit, but he did send a final message to the internal channel, just 3 words, forwarded by Layla. "I resign, effective immediately." John looked at Layla. "File it." Amelia Grant's voice came through Layla's earpiece next. "New flight crew is on standby, ready to replace all terminated staff within 10 minutes. John turned to the passengers. "We'll be departing shortly, with new staff, with new policies, and with a new promise. No one will ever be reassigned because they don't look like the brochure." Camilla was gone. Aiden was gone. Olivia was long gone, but their actions remained in every passenger's memory. And that was the real work ahead, not just to remove the wrongdoers, but to remove the assumptions that made room for them in the first place. Michael walked down the aisle, extended a hand. "Thank you, not just for what you did, but for letting us see it." John shook it. "No more upgrades by appearance," he said, "only by action." As the new flight crew boarded, one attendant, black, mid-30s, crisp uniform, paused at 1A. "Mr. Marshall," he said, "welcome aboard. Can I offer you anything before takeoff?" John looked up, smiled. "Yeah," he said, "a copy of the passenger manifest. Let's both read it out loud." The engines hadn't roared. The cabin lights hadn't dimmed. The wheels hadn't rolled an inch. Yet somehow, this aircraft had already traveled through a revolution. Because for the first time in its flight log, Sky Pulse Flight SP-2004 wasn't transporting people. It was transporting truth. And the passengers weren't just buckled in. They were fully awake. John Marshall sat calmly in 1A, a seat reclaimed not by power, but by principle. His fingers rested lightly on the folded manifest, newly printed by the replacement attendant. Every name, every row, fully transparent, confirmed, and respected. Layla Carter stood behind him, still recording, still logging every whisper of accountability. Her screen lit up with alerts messages from internal staff, media contacts, board members, and HR. But something deeper was happening in the cabin. The passengers were speaking to each other. Strangers at takeoff were now telling stories like old allies. Michael Grayson shared how his wife, a black pediatric surgeon, had once been detained at the gate because she wore Crocs and a hoodie. She was flying home from a 36-hour shift. They said she looked like a risk. The man next to him shook his head. "My brother's a mail carrier. Same thing. Every time he flies, they check his bag twice, even when he's pre-cleared." Row after row, the truth unraveled. Not dramatic, not always loud, but consistent. The plane didn't wear badges. It wore hoodies. It wore skin. It wore everyday reality. Then, a dramatic high point. An elderly white woman in row 7 stood slowly, gripping her armrest for balance. "My name is Margaret Fielding," she said, voice quiet but clear. "I've flown this airline 26 times in the last 5 years." People turned to look. "I've seen things. I didn't always understand them. I thought it was just bad luck or coincidence when someone got moved or stopped or flagged. I never asked why. I never questioned." She looked toward John. "But today, I will." Her eyes watered. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the kind born from collective reflection. Then someone clapped. Then another. It wasn't applause for Margaret. It was applause for finally seeing. John stood again. "Let me be clear," he said. "This isn't a crusade against mistakes. It's a stand against patterns." He held up the manifest. "This list isn't just passengers, it's promises. And every promise begins with visibility." Layla stepped forward. "We're implementing a new protocol, the passenger promise. Every boarding will now require dual verification, manifest match and facial recognition approval. No rerouting without full documentation. Every override will now trigger a mandatory HQ review." Grace Kim raised her phone again. "You're turning the airline industry into a case study." John shook his head. "Not the industry. This airline. The others can watch or follow." The cabin hummed not with engines, but with clarity. Donald Ray, the retired flight chief, nodded toward Layla. "If you need a training curriculum, I'll help write it." "You already did," she replied. "You just hadn't said it aloud until today." Flight attendants from the replacement crew moved through the aisles now, calm and professional, not rushing, not overcompensating, just respectful. Present. One asked a young black man in 6A if he'd like water or juice. The man looked stunned. "No one's ever offered me anything without checking my ticket 3 times." The attendant smiled. "Today, we serve passengers, not assumptions." Olivia Wentworth's name still lingered in the air like a bad perfume. Her behavior had sparked the exposure, but she was never the story. She was the symptom. The story was about the gatekeepers who let power speak louder than policy, and the man who stopped them without ever raising his voice. John turned to Grace. "You're a journalist, so ask yourself, what's the headline?" She didn't hesitate. "CEO grounds corruption." While still at the gate, John smiled. "Print it." Layla received a ping on her tablet. A message from Amelia. "The Slack group is being shut down. All unauthorized communications flagged. Disciplinary actions initiated." John read the message, then faced the passengers again. "You all just witnessed something rare. Real-time accountability. No PR filter. No press release. Just truth. Caught in the act and corrected before wheels up." Michael leaned into the aisle. "This flight didn't leave the runway. But somehow, I feel like I've gone somewhere." John replied, "That's what justice feels like. Movement without motion." As the cabin prepared for final boarding procedures with the new crew, passengers began to settle. But they were not the same. They'd boarded as customers. They'd become witnesses, and now they were allies. The aircraft doors hadn't closed yet. But the gap between power and perception had already been sealed from the inside. John Marshall sat quietly in seat 1A, his white t-shirt still unwrinkled, beard now gone, the full weight of his identity visible to everyone. But that wasn't what silenced the cabin. It was the realization that he had never raised his voice and yet shifted an entire system. The cabin lights flickered as final systems were tested. The new crew had assumed their positions calm, composed, and already briefed on what had transpired. Passengers looked at them not with suspicion, but with hope, because it was clear now. Skypulse wasn't trying to fly above accountability. It was trying to rebuild mid-air. Layla Carter scrolled through the latest data packet from Amelia Grant names, infractions, override patterns. But one column stood out: impact. Each flagged action wasn't just a protocol violation. It had a human face. Seat 3C downgraded after being visually misaligned with premium tone. Seat 1D reassigned due to external attire mismatch. Seat 5B flagged for vocal tone, disruptive to ambiance. John stared at those lines and shook his head. They weren't managing safety, he whispered. They were managing aesthetic. Grace Kim had never stopped recording. But now she sat in her own seat, just watching, no script, no narration. "This is going to change airline policy worldwide," she said to Layla. Layla didn't even look up. That's the idea. Then the dramatic high point hit like a lightning bolt. Quiet, but seismic. A chime sounded from Layla's tablet. A flagged message had just been unarchived from an internal chat system. It was from Captain Jacob Hayes, dated 3 months prior. "If a passenger looks like trouble, trust your gut. Move them. If they complain, the system will back you." Another ping, another message. From Camilla. "Copy that. Did it yesterday. Hoodied guy with boots got rerouted. Said he was a VC. LOL. A third ping. Keep premium seats clean. Some passengers downgrade the view." Layla stood. "Sir," she said to John, "we just found proof of the system's design." John nodded once. "Release it to HR and legal. Then send it to every Skypulse board member." The plane remained still, but inside, the velocity of reform accelerated. Donald Ray approached John quietly. "I never thought I'd see the day." John turned. "You mean where power answers for silence?" Donald shook his head. "Where silence finally speaks back." Passengers were quieter now, but it wasn't discomfort. It was reflection. One woman near the front had tears in her eyes. Another man, white-haired and suit-clad, closed his laptop and stared out the window for several minutes. Because what had happened wasn't just corporate drama. It was cultural rupture, the kind that makes people wonder how many moments they'd missed, how many injustices they'd excused, how many bribes they'd called thank yous. Then John did something no one expected. He removed his seatbelt, rose from 1A, and slowly walked down the aisle. He stopped at row 4, where Donald Ray sat. "I need someone to help design the new training," he said. "Someone who saw it from both sides." Donald stood. "I'll do it. Not to rewrite history, but to keep it from repeating." John nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." Grace Kim spoke softly, almost to herself. "You came in dressed like no one, to show everyone how power really works." John looked back at her. I came in dressed like myself. Aiden Brooks had been escorted out quietly. No yelling, no spectacle. But his expression as he left had been captured by Grace's lens, one of regret. Camila Torres never reappeared. The intercom call she placed earlier logged. Her override actions confirmed. Her protocol references disavowed by HR. What once was whispered procedure was now exposed policy fraud. John reached the rear of the cabin. He didn't need to say anything. People saw him. And more importantly, they saw themselves in him now. Back in 1A, Layla awaited the final word from Amelia Grant. When it arrived, it was 5 words long. "You have full launch authority," Layla whispered. "It's done. You can announce." But John didn't reach for the intercom. He looked at Layla. Let the new captain do it, because John Marshall had already said everything that needed to be said. Not through speeches, but through action, a soft chime echoed through the cabin. Then, a voice, not John Marshall's. Not Camilla's, not Aiden's, and certainly not Captain Jacob Hayes, whose silence had already written its own resignation. No, this was a new voice. Calm, professional, warm. "Good morning. Passengers, this is your acting captain, Teresa Monroe. On behalf of Sky Pulse Airlines, I want to thank you for your patience during our unexpected delay. You've witnessed something unprecedented today, not a malfunction in machinery, but a restoration of mission." The cabin fell silent. Captain Monroe continued, "Sky Pulse is no longer just about speed or luxury. Starting now, it's about truth, equity, and accountability." Row 2, Row 6, Row 9. Passengers sat back, listening not because they were required to, but because they wanted to. We will be departing shortly with a fully verified crew, a cleared manifest, and a commitment to never again assign seats based on perception instead of payment. John Marshall exhaled slowly in 1A, hands clasped in his lap. He hadn't written the words, but they echoed everything he believed, and this time, someone else carried them forward. Layla leaned in. She wrote that herself. "Sir." "No script," John nodded. "Then she's already part of the new era." Michael Grayson murmured to his seatmate, "I never thought I'd see an airline issue a public apology at 30,000 feet before even taking off." The seatmate replied, "I never thought I'd see an airline mean it." Just then, a dramatic high point unfolded not from the crew, but from the passengers. Grace Kim's phone buzzed, airdropped. She opened the file. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God, what is it?" Layla asked. "It's screenshots. From the Slack group Camilla mentioned. Someone inside just leaked everything." Grace held her phone up. Her fingers flicked through a series of messages. "Got $200 from 4A. Bumped the guy in cargo pants to 8C. Red alert hoodie in 1B. Make it look like a system check. Big donor in 2A. Move whoever's there. Fast." Layla's jaw tightened. "Who sent it?" Grace read the anonymous tag, "A quiet storm, reckoning." Then another message appeared. Plain, undeniable. "You're watching John Marshall today. But remember, we let this happen yesterday." John reviewed the screenshots silently. "I want this entered into the audit," he said. "Every name, every message. No shields." Layla forwarded it instantly. "Already sent." Captain Monroe's voice returned. As we taxi, we remind all passengers that dignity is no longer optional aboard this airline. We fly to connect, not to separate. No one clapped. Not yet, because the weight of those words deserved stillness first. A flight attendant approached John with a sealed envelope. From HR, she said. Inside was a printout of the newly passed Passenger Equity Manifesto, a document created, reviewed, and signed by the entire Sky Pulse Board during the delay. At the top, Clause 1. All passengers will be treated with respect and equality regardless of attire, appearance, perceived wealth, or social cues. Clause 2. Any crew found accepting bribes, reallocating seats without verified cause, or profiling passengers shall be immediately investigated and terminated if found guilty. Clause 3. Every Sky Pulse flight will include a designated equity monitor trained and rotated among staff to ensure these standards are upheld in real time. John signed the bottom of the page, quietly. Then handed it back, put it into the seatback pocket. Every plane, every flight. As the engines rumbled to life, Grace whispered, "This feels like something bigger than aviation." John replied, "It is." The plane began rolling toward the runway, not just with wheels and fuel, but with a renewed conscience. At row 9, a little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she asked, "is he a king?" The father glanced toward John. "No," he said. "He's something rarer." "What?" "A good man in power." As the aircraft lifted off the ground, finally, the cabin didn't cheer. They breathed, because now, altitude didn't just mean elevation. It meant evolution at 32,000 feet. Sky Pulse Flight SP-204 cruised smoothly through open air, but unlike most flights, the turbulence had already passed on the ground. What remained now was clarity, not just in the skies, but in purpose. Passengers no longer sat in first class, business, and coach. They sat in alignment, each of them a witness to a truth they could never unsee. John Marshall sat upright in 1A, arms crossed loosely. He wasn't reading, wasn't working, wasn't sleeping. He was reflecting, because this wasn't the conclusion of a confrontation. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Layla Carter tapped gently on her tablet. Every 90 seconds, a new message came in. Staff whistleblowers from across the Sky Pulse network. Pilots admitting they'd looked away. Flight attendants submitting anonymous regrets. Customers who had been downgraded, flagged, or humiliated now speaking out publicly. She turned the screen to John. "Sir, the dam's broken. Everyone's coming forward." John didn't smile. He simply said, "Good. Let it flood." Further back, Grace Kim had stopped recording. For now, her camera was off. Her reporter's instinct wasn't. She stared at the clouds outside, voice low. "It's strange. We talk about turbulence as if it's always in the air. But the worst turbulence we face? It's down there. Inside systems. Inside silence." A fellow passenger nodded beside her. This flight felt like justice with wings. Donald Ray stood from his seat. The former head of in-flight operations, now reborn as a truth-teller, walked slowly down the aisle until he reached John. "Sir," he said, "you need to hear this." He handed John a printed sheet, A message forwarded from one of the flight staff still loyal to integrity. The title at the top: Passenger Screening for Ambiance Fit. Beneath it, a checklist, jewelry visible. Designer logos present. Grooming standards aligned with premium image. Accent neutral, skin tone. Likely to blend or stand out. The dramatic high point came not from a scream, but from the quiet rage rising across the entire first-class cabin. Michael Grayson, seated nearby, stood up. "This isn't just profiling," he said loudly. "It's branding bias. They dress discrimination in customer service lingo." Passengers nodded. Some gasped. John passed the document to Layla. "Forward that to Amelia. Make it public." Layla moved quickly. "Done." Then added, "Sir, multiple airlines are now trending online. Passengers sharing similar stories. This isn't just SkyPulse." John turned toward her. "Then let us be the first to clean our own sky." A few seats back, an older couple leaned into one another. The woman said, "I feel like I saw behind the curtain today." Her husband replied, "And for once, the person behind it did something." John tapped the in-flight communication console and requested a cabin-wide announcement. Within seconds, the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is John Marshall. I'm not speaking to you today as a CEO. I'm speaking to you as a fellow passenger. What you witnessed this morning was not an isolated incident. It was the visible scar of a hidden pattern." The cabin quieted completely. SkyPulse was founded to serve, not to separate. And today, we begin again. He paused. Then, "Some of you may be wondering why I didn't reveal myself sooner, why I walked on this plane like anyone else, why I wore a t-shirt instead of a tie. Because equity is only real if it applies before someone knows your name, before they know your salary, before they see your title." In row 3, a young man whispered, "Damn, he's right." In row 7, a woman closed her eyes and mouthed, "Thank you." "Today," John continued, "we don't celebrate power. We celebrate conscience. And from this point forward, every SkyPulse employee, every executive, and every contractor will be measured not by how well they serve the top percent, but how equally they serve everyone." The intercom clicked off, then silence. The powerful kind, the rare kind, the kind you remember longer than any speech. Layla turned to John. "That announcement, it'll be archived, used in training, shared with shareholders." John replied, "Then let it echo." As Flight SP-204 flew eastward, passengers returned to their seats. But they didn't return to who they were. They were changed. And so was the sky above them. SkyPulse Flight SP-204 glided through the troposphere. But for once, it wasn't altitude that gave the passengers a new perspective. It was what they had all just witnessed on the ground and in the air, a new kind of turbulence. Not from weather, from truth. In row 2A, Grace Kim was already outlining the article in her head. She would title it, "Equity at 30,000 feet. The flight that rewrote policy in real time." Not a headline born of imagination, but of evidence. A CEO had boarded in silence, in casual clothes, fully prepared to be mistaken. And when he used the moment not to punish but to rebuild. Further back, Michael Grayson scrolled through comments under a news alert just posted. Breaking sky pulse. CEO John Marshall fires entire flight crew. Mid-boarding after witnessing racial discrimination firsthand. About time. Finally, someone in power actually did something. Watched it go down live. Respect. Michael shook his head. The internet's already processing it faster than the flight crew processed that bribe. At the front, John Marshall reviewed a new report from Layla, an early draft of the Pulse Equity Initiative launch memo, training modules, internal reforms, public apologies. He read the first line. Bias does not need a badge to do damage. It just needs an unchecked process. He nodded. Strong. Keep it. Layla added, Amelia says you'll be asked to present the initiative at the Global Aviation Summit next month. John replied, Let's earn it first. Then came the dramatic high point, a chime, a system alert. Layla's tablet flashed with a flagged transfer $20,000 donation to Seat 1A override, manually cleared by Captain Jacob Hayes. John leaned forward. Wait. That override was for this flight. Layla confirmed. Yes. Olivia Wentworth made the transfer 16 minutes before boarding, logged through a dummy donation portal, masked as a campaign gift to our East Coast Expansion Fund. Michael, overhearing, growled. They've been laundering bribes through contributions. Layla's eyes didn't leave the screen, and the account was tied to a third-party contractor, Marion Locke. We found 5 others like him across 3 hubs. John stood up. No more excuses. Flag the account. Forward it to compliance. Notify legal. And suspend every staff member who processed a donation tied to reassignment. Passengers nearby watched in silence as a man in a t-shirt gave instructions with the force of a judge. Not yelling, not threatening, just deciding. With clarity and conviction, Donald Ray leaned over from across the aisle. You don't just have a scandal, you have a case study. John responded. Then let's make it a blueprint. Further back, a young flight attendant in training on her first shadow flight whispered to her senior supervisor, Is it always like this? The older woman shook her head, eyes wet. No, this is different. This is how it should have been. Grace Kim rose from her seat and walked to 1A, camera in hand, but powered off. May I ask one thing, she said. John nodded. You could have rerouted the entire flight, made a statement, called the press. Why not? He looked out the window, because disruption doesn't create legacy. Correction does. One plane at a time, one policy at a time, one person at a time. Layla's earpiece buzzed. She raised her hand. Update from Amelia. We just got approval to create a passenger equity board. 6 seats. 3 will be reserved for non-employees, everyday travelers. Michael, hearing this, turned. Wait. You mean us, John replied. Who better to design dignity than those who needed it most? The cabin stirred again, not with noise, but with awe, not from what had been said, but from what was already happening. The clouds outside parted, the early afternoon sun flooding the cabin with soft gold light. It didn't feel coincidental. It felt symbolic. A flight once grounded by arrogance and assumption, now flying on reform and resolve. From the cockpit, Captain Teresa Monroe's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at a steady altitude. We'd like to thank you for being part of something bigger than a flight. You were part of a moment. And if you choose to fly with us again, we promise we'll be ready to earn that choice, not assume it. John looked down at the printed manifest again, then closed it. This flight was no longer about 1A. It was about everyone. At 34,000 feet, Sky Pulse Flight SP-204 wasn't flying through clouds anymore. It was flying through consequences and toward transformation. What began as a simple boarding conflict had unfolded into something far greater, a public unmasking of institutional bias, and the start of something airlines rarely achieve. Redemption in real time. John Marshall no longer needed to speak. Every move he made was an answer. From the tablet in his hand came pings every 30 seconds. Union reps requesting meetings to revise equity guidelines. Airlines across the Atlantic requesting access to the Pulse Equity Initiative. Former passengers submitting testimonials, some raw, some heartbreaking. One message simply read, "I was the girl who got bumped from 3A because my hair was in twists. I didn't cry until now. Thank you." Layla Carter sat across from him, fingers flying. "We're at 212 internal whistleblowers and 57 ex-passengers," John replied without emotion. "Catalog everyone. Truth deserves a folder." Back in row 8, a passenger named Naomi Richards Black, mid-30s. Entrepreneur turned to her seatmate. "I've been flying business since I was 25. You know what's crazy? I still get nervous at the gate." Her seatmate, a quiet white woman in her 50s, looked stunned. Why? Naomi stared forward. Because there's always that moment, the look, the doubt. Like I don't belong in row 2 unless I'm someone's assistant. The woman whispered, "I never noticed that. Until now." Meanwhile, Grace Kim received a direct tip on her phone. A link, encrypted, labeled, Olivia Wentworth System-Wide Abuse Pattern. What she opened next was the dramatic high point, a database manually compiled by a former SkyPulse reservation agent of every upgrade request tied to Olivia Wentworth's name. 18 flights, 17 forced reassignments, 10 bribes. One note read, "Passenger in 1A downgraded. Reason didn't photograph well." Grace didn't say a word. She just stood, walked the aisle, and handed her phone directly to John. He read in silence, eyes narrowing, shoulders steady, then passed it to Layla. "Flag every flight. Contact every displaced passenger. Offer formal apology and compensation." Grace blinked. "You're going to reach out to everyone." John nodded. They were invisible once. Not anymore. Back in row 5, a man named Terrence leaned across the aisle to Michael Grayson. "This flight? It'll be in documentaries one day." Michael shook his head. "Forget that. It should be in training manuals." Donald Ray slowly stood, taking the cabin mic offered by a steward. "Folks," he began, "most of you don't know me, but I used to train this airline's crew, and I failed you." A ripple of surprise passed through the passengers. "I saw things," he continued. "I let tradition blind me to justice. I let client satisfaction overrule fairness, and for that, I apologize." John raised his head, didn't interrupt, just listened. "I retired with regrets," Donald said, voice cracking. "But thanks to what we saw today, I'll spend the rest of my time making sure no one else does." Applause, quiet at first, Then a standing ovation. Layla tapped John's shoulder. "Sir, the internal Slack channel is being audited live. Multiple moderators already suspended." He nodded. "Good. Burn the floorboards if the house is infected." From the intercom again, "Captain Teresa Monroe, we're beginning initial descent. But we want to thank you not just for flying with us, but for challenging us. You didn't just watch history. You helped rewrite it." The plane tilted slightly as it dropped in altitude. But no one's mood dropped with it. If anything, the cabin felt lighter. Because people weren't just returning to their destinations, they were returning to awareness. In the front row, John looked around the cabin. Quiet now. Thoughtful. Connected. It wasn't victory he felt. It was repair. He stood, walked to the center of the aisle, and addressed the passengers directly. "We can't undo every harm, but we can remove the excuse of 'we didn't know,' because now you do, and so do we." He turned slowly, scanning every row. SkyPulse isn't claiming to be fixed, but we are claiming responsibility. One man near the rear shouted, "This is the first time I've ever clapped for a corporate statement." Laughter. Real. Relieved. Not because everything was solved, but because something had finally started. As the wheels of SkyPulse Flight SP-204 kissed the runway, there was no eruption of applause. No wild cheer. No victory chant. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes when truth lands harder than any touchdown. Because while the plane arrived in New York on schedule, the people on board had traveled far further through discomfort, recognition, and irreversible clarity. John Marshall remained seated in 1A, hands folded, eyes forward. He didn't need to move. Because the entire cabin had already moved with him, in the row behind, Grace Kim tapped notes into her phone. "This will be the most watched exposé I've ever produced," she muttered. Michael Grayson leaned over. "Promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't let the headline be about outrage. Make it about change." She nodded. "It already is." The plane slowed, taxiing toward Gate 12. Outside the window, a line of high-ranking SkyPulse executives, press liaisons, and legal advisors waited with sharp suits and neutral expressions. They had received every alert, watched every video. And now they waited for the man in the white t-shirt to emerge not just as CEO, but as the symbol of a redefined company. Captain Teresa Monroe's voice crackled overhead one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. On behalf of SkyPulse, thank you for bearing witness to the start of a new era." No one moved, not because they didn't want to, but because they understood what had just happened wasn't the end of a flight. It was the beginning of a movement. The doors opened. And just before the first-class curtain drew back, John stood. "Before anyone exits," he said calmly, "I'd like to ask one thing." He turned to face the passengers. "If today made you uncomfortable, good. If it made you rethink silence, even better. If it made you want to speak, do it louder. Not just on this plane. In your workplace, your boardrooms, your dinner tables." A few heads nodded. Others whispered, "Amen." Then came the dramatic high point. One of the passengers, an older black woman seated quietly in 6B, stood up. Her voice was low, But steady, Mr. Marshall. My husband worked baggage for Sky Pulse 20 years ago. He was demoted after reporting a supervisor who sold seat upgrades under the table. Nobody listened. She pulled out a faded badge from her purse, held it up. They called him a liar, labeled him difficult. We lost our home. He never flew again. The cabin hushed. Emotion thickened. I wish he were alive to see this, she said. To see you. John stepped forward, slowly, then extended his hand. He held hers gently, then bowed his head. For every voice that was buried, today was for them. As she sat, passengers wiped their eyes, not just from sorrow, but from release. Because for every humiliation tucked away quietly, this flight had shouted one word: enough. Outside the plane, the press prepared. Microphones, cameras, statements ready. But John wasn't in a rush to get there. He turned to Layla Carter. Hold boarding for 10 minutes. I want the passengers off first. No spectacle. She nodded. Security's been instructed to let them pass without interference. He smiled. For once, let the truth exit before the cameras roll. As the passengers stood row by row, many paused to shake his hand. Others whispered, thank yous. Some just nodded, but none passed without acknowledgement. Because every person on that plane had seen what it looks like when power listens, Donald Ray was the last to exit before the crew. He turned to John at the door. I trained thousands, but I never trained for this. John replied, then let's start now. Donald gave a solemn nod. You've got my commitment. Grace Kim handed him a folded note before leaving. Final headline draft, she said. Use it if you like. John opened it. The flight where Justice sat in 1A and stayed seated. He smiled. Perfect. As the door closed and the final crew members stepped out behind him, John remained inside the aircraft for a brief moment. Just him, the seat, the silence. And then, one final whisper to himself. Legacy doesn't board early. It boards with everyone else and stays until the last seat is safe. John Marshall stepped off Sky Pulse Flight SP-204 with no security entourage. No entourage, no briefcase, no speech. Just the same white t-shirt, same calm expression, and the same quiet thunder that had silenced an entire cabin at 35,000 feet. The jet bridge wasn't a tunnel anymore. It was a runway for accountability. And on the other end, the press was waiting. Cameras rolled instantly. Boom mics extended like antennae from a hive of attention. A reporter shouted, Mr. Marshall, is it true you fired your crew before takeoff? Another, did you plan this as a PR stunt? And one from the back, are you admitting to systemic discrimination at Sky Pulse? John raised a single hand, not to deflect, but to speak. In the last 48 hours, he began. I've received 173 verified complaints from passengers who were denied dignity based on appearance. He let the words hang. This is not a stunt. It is a correction. And today's flight was not staged. It was unscripted accountability. Beside him, Layla Carter pulled up a statement on her tablet. We're releasing a full transcript and internal chat log from the incident. Nothing redacted. The journalists leaned in. This was no CEO shielding a company. This was a CEO exposing it. Then came the dramatic high point. A sharp voice cut through the press scrum. It was Olivia Wentworth, uninvited, unapologetic. She pushed past a camera crew, sunglasses on, phone in hand. "John," she barked, "you're humiliating me in public based on a misunderstanding." Gasps fluttered. Phones aimed. John didn't flinch. "Ms. Wentworth," he said evenly, "you bribed a flight crew to unseat a passenger." She waved her phone. "That wasn't a bribe. That was a donation. You didn't even look like an executive." The reporters froze. "Exactly," John replied. "And that's the mirror you now have to live with." Layla stepped between them. "Ms. Wentworth, you've been banned from all SkyPulse flights indefinitely. You'll receive written confirmation within the hour." Olivia scoffed. "You think you're noble? This is cancel culture at 30,000 feet. John stared at her calmly. "No, this is accountability with a boarding pass." Security escorted her from the terminal as cameras captured every moment. The press immediately surrounded John again. One reporter asked, "So this is permanent new policy?" John answered, "Permanent is not enough. We are rebuilding the culture." He held up a document. The Passenger Equity Protocol signed, time-stamped, board-approved, with sections on. No reassignment without dual verification. Mandatory equity training for all crew. Zero tolerance for bribery or bias-based reseating. We've also established a passenger oversight committee. And yes, some of them will be sitting beside you on future flights. "A flashbulb popped?" another journalist asked. "Are other airlines involved?" "We've received requests from 5 carriers already," Layla answered, "including international partners. Change travels fast when truth flies first class." Donald Ray stepped into the press line now. He didn't need an introduction. He just spoke. "I trained the old guard. I'm here to help train the new one. And let me say, this John Marshall didn't embarrass the airline. He rescued it." The crowd responded not with applause, but silence. The kind that honors weight over noise. Back in the terminal, several passengers from Flight SP-204 lingered. They watched from a distance, not as fans, but as witnesses. They knew what had really happened. And what hadn't happened before that day. John looked directly at the live feed cameras now. "To anyone watching who's ever been asked to prove they belonged, this is your proof." He paused. "You don't need to perform wealth. You don't need to match an image. You already belong. Your dignity flies with you." The interview ended. Cameras lowered. Questions stopped. But the movement, it had just taken off. Layla leaned in. "The story's already viral. Trending top 3 worldwide. But the board says your credibility just doubled." John replied without ego. "Then let's spend it building what should have been there from the beginning." He looked out the terminal windows. Flights continued boarding. Passengers moving. Baggage rolling. The world hadn't stopped. But it had been redirected, one flight at a time. The cameras were off, the microphones gone. But inside the SkyPulse headquarters later that evening, the momentum still crackled in the air like static before a thunderstorm. John Marshall stood before a packed boardroom executives, department heads, PR officers, HR leads, all of them summoned for an emergency summit, now known internally as the Flight 204 Reckoning. On the wall behind him, a live dashboard displayed 3 columns. Complaints acknowledged 229, Crew suspensions pending review 41. Passenger testimonials received 316. Below that, in bold green equity initiative phase, I live. Layla Carter stood beside him, tablet in hand, monitoring uploads, internal messages, and field reports. The building buzzed not with panic, but purpose. John didn't begin with thanks or greetings. He began with truth. Today wasn't about bad apples, he said. It was about a rotten basket no one wanted to check. Silence. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of Camila Torres holding the boarding pass she tore. SkyPulse let this happen. Our systems weren't flawed. They were working exactly as designed, just for the wrong people. Then came the dramatic high point. He turned to Layla and nodded. She tapped her tablet. A video began playing on the central screen. Not a dramatization, footage from inside. Flight SP-204, Grace Kim's raw footage, uncut. Camilla's voice echoed through the room. You don't act like first class. You certainly don't dress like it. Then Olivia's. Move him. I'll donate again if I have to. And finally, John's voice. Quiet but seismic. 15 minutes from now. Your badge won't work. Gasps rippled through the room. A few execs turned pale. Others shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "We let this go on for years." John turned off the video. Let the silence stretch. You're not here to be comfortable, he said. You're here because comfort bred complicity. A hand slowly raised SkyPulse's CFO, Marcus Lynn. Mr. Marshall, he began carefully. This initiative may trigger lawsuits, revenue loss, investor pushback. John didn't blink. If your profit margin relies on prejudice, then it was bankrupt before today. Another executive chimed in. But the cost of retraining, settlement programs, is less than the cost of silence. John cut in. We're not budgeting regret. We're investing in integrity. He clicked to the next slide. The Pulse Equity Infrastructure. Full-scale equity audit of every department. Third-party ombudsman appointed for employee appeals. Passenger Equity Committee launched rotated quarterly. Diversity recertification mandatory for all management and flight crew. Layla added, and we're piloting AI seat assignment fairness checks. If you try to bypass the system, it'll flag you and notify legal. The room buzzed with murmurs. One legal advisor asked, won't that make operations slower? John answered, no, it'll make them honest. And that's faster in the long run. He walked slowly around the table now. Injustice isn't a glitch, he said. It's a design that assumes no one will challenge it, until someone does. He stopped at the head of the table. And today, that challenge began in seat 1A. Across the boardroom, the screen updated. Trending hashtag seat 1A. At the airport, a temporary exhibit was already being installed, a black leather airline seat under a spotlight, with a plaque that read, this seat was denied to the man who built the airline, then used by him to rebuild it. Back in the boardroom, Layla read out a message. Amelia Grant just confirmed 3 more CEOs from other carriers want to meet. They're requesting access to our protocol framework. John nodded. Then we're not a flight. We're a standard. He turned to the final slide, a single sentence. Equity doesn't cost you a seat. It makes room for more. Donald Ray, seated quietly in the back, slowly stood. "I trained the old way," he said. "Let me help retrain the new one, but this time with no blind spots." John met his gaze. "You're already on the schedule." A vote was called, not out loud. Every executive present raised their hand. Unanimous. SkyPulse wasn't just reforming. It was rebuilding, not because it had to, but because someone in a t-shirt proved it was overdue. By morning, SkyPulse Flight SP2US4 was more than a flight. It was a flashpoint. News outlets ran wall-to-wall coverage. Editorials called it the first-class reckoning. Cable panels debated the ethics. Travel forums exploded. And social media. Social media had crowned a new phrase. Pulling a marshal defined as quietly sitting in power until someone makes the mistake of underestimating you. John Marshall didn't flinch under the spotlight. Because he didn't need the light. He had brought his own. At 9:00 Sora, ma'am, he arrived at the National Equity in Aviation Conference unannounced. The event was already buzzing with talk of him. Some execs looked nervous, others hopeful, a few resentful. The keynote speaker hadn't shown, so John walked to the microphone and began to speak. "I didn't come here for applause," he opened. "I came because the altitude is never higher than the values you lift with you." A hush blanketed the room. In the last 48 hours, over 400 passengers contacted my team with stories. Some were recent, some were decades old. All were the same. They were judged before they were seated. He pulled out a crumpled boarding pass. Not symbolic, his actual one. First class, seat 1A, paid in full, denied in full, and then weaponized by people hired to uphold dignity. A few heads bowed. Others stared straight ahead. "This seat didn't prove who I am," he continued. "It proved who they thought I wasn't." The dramatic high point came without warning. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "Then why didn't you stop it sooner?" A man stood mid-50s. Silver tie. Continental Sky Executive Badge. "You've been CEO for years. Why did it take this long to act?" The room turned. Gasps fluttered. John didn't raise his voice. "I've stopped many things," he replied. Silently. Through memos. Through meetings. Through HR investigations. He stepped forward. Calm, certain, but I realized something. Silence protects the system. Only exposure breaks it. The man said nothing more. John's eyes swept the room. "You want to know why I wore jeans and a t-shirt on that flight?" he asked. "Because every policy we built was failing people in that outfit. The ones who didn't walk like power or dress like privilege, but paid the same damn price for the seat." Layla Carter, watching from the side, texted Amelia Grant. "He's off script, and it's perfect." John continued. "We spend millions marketing luxury. But what's luxurious about humility? What's first class about fairness?" He let the silence stretch. "Every airline here today has a Camilla, has an Olivia, has a system that works well until a hoodie walks on board." He pulled out a new document. The Pulse Accord. He laid it on the podium. "This isn't just for SkyPulse anymore. We're opening it. Co-sign it. Join us. Or be named." The crowd shifted. Some execs looked at each other nervously. Others straightened up. John closed. If you need a customer to wear a Rolex to receive eye contact, you're not running an airline. You're running a caste system at cruising speed. And with that, he stepped down. By noon, 9 airlines had requested to review the Pulse Accord. 2 had already signed. Meanwhile, back at SkyPulse HQ, something else happened. Without cameras, without fanfare, Camila Torres returned. Not to argue, not to plead, but to drop off an envelope. Security flagged it. HR opened it. Inside, a handwritten apology, a resignation letter, and a donation receipt, $5,000 sent to the Passenger Equity Legal Defense Fund. Attached was a note. I was wrong. I was blind. Let others see because I finally did. John read the letter quietly in his office. Layla asked, "You want to respond?" He shook his head. Not yet. Let her live in the truth a while. That's a longer lesson than any email. As sunset touched the tarmac of JFK, the chair in seat 1A sat empty on a parked SkyPulse plane, not because it wasn't booked, but because it was being polished literally by ground staff who'd heard the story. They didn't want anyone else to sit there until they knew. It had become more than a seat. It had become a symbol. A week had passed since Flight SP-204. But it no longer mattered what day it was, because now, across terminals and tarmacs, lounges and lobbies, there was only before Marshall and after Marshall. SkyPulse had become the first airline in U.S. history to implement a full top-down reform in under 7 days. And John Marshall, he didn't take a victory lap. He took a seat in the same office where the first complaint had been ignored 4 years earlier. Same building, same chair, different era. The Pulse Equity Initiative wasn't a promise anymore. It was policy. Mandatory retraining had begun in 17 hubs. The internal Slack group, the Priority Quiet Board, had been shut down, investigated, and used as training material on what corruption looks like in casual code. The company charter was rewritten. Appearance-based seating now triggered automatic HR review. And for the first time in aviation history, a CEO wrote an open letter to all passengers titled, "We were flying blind, but not anymore." Yet despite the transformation, John knew the danger wasn't over, because bias doesn't die in headlines. It hides in polite emails, whispered jokes, unchecked loyalty. Layla Carter stood in his office, tablet in hand. "Sir, another 211 testimonies came in overnight." He looked up. "That makes what? Now, 1673 and counting." He exhaled. "We failed more people than we'll ever meet," Layla replied. "But they're meeting us now." Then came the dramatic high point. Amelia Grant, SkyPulse's chairwoman, called an emergency board meeting. Everyone arrived assuming it was about damage control, but Amelia stood and made a single motion. "I propose we vote to rebrand SkyPulse not cosmetically, but culturally, and I nominate John Marshall to become executive chairman, with full operational control over global reform strategy." The room froze. One director leaned forward. "Executive chairman. That gives him veto power over everything." Amelia nodded. "And he's earned it." John stood slowly. "I didn't ask for this," Amelia replied, "which is exactly why you're ready." The board voted, unanimous. The news broke in minutes. SkyPulse names: John Marshall, Executive Chairman, mandates ethics reforms across entire aviation group. Within hours, airline stocks jumped, not because shareholders supported ethics, but because passengers now demanded it. And John, he didn't celebrate. He booked a seat. The next day, John Marshall boarded Flight 371 from Atlanta to Chicago. He chose economy. Not as a statement, not for attention, but because that's where change has to fly first. As he entered the cabin, passengers stared, recognizing him, but John just nodded quietly. He helped an elderly woman lift her bag into the overhead bin. He thanked the crew. He folded into seat 14C without ceremony, and just before takeoff, a child across the aisle asked, "Are you the guy from the plane?" John smiled. "I'm one of them." Mid-flight, the flight attendant handed him a note folded in half. He opened it. "My brother was bumped from business class because they said his beard was too unkempt for premium. Thank you for giving him a voice." No name, just the truth. John tucked it in his pocket. Back at headquarters, Layla prepared the final phase of the Pulse Equity Plan. Passenger Ombudsman Hotline went live. Live Manifest Transparency launched for all customers. A new slogan was unveiled. Every seat carries a story. Respect it. Donald Ray was already training the first batch of new recruits. He pointed to a mock cabin display. Your job isn't to assess who belongs. Your job is to serve without assumption. And if you ever ask, "Does this person fit first class?" remember, you're asking the wrong question. At the same time, an editor at The Atlantic submitted a new cover story, How a Seat Denial Became a Blueprint for Corporate Conscience. Grace Kim's documentary trailer dropped online that night. Millions watched the first clip, John standing silently in seat 1A as chaos unfolded around him. The title appeared in white text, "The Seat They Tried to Take, and the System That Took It Further." As the week closed, John returned to his office. On his desk was a gift. A model plane, custom painted. Black and gold. On the side, a new SkyPulse slogan. "Dignity doesn't fly, stand by." He turned it over. The nameplate read, Flight SP-2004. The day power sat quietly. 1 month later, Flight SP-2004 was no longer just a story, it was a curriculum. University classrooms studied it. Corporate boardrooms debated it. And inside SkyPulse, the legacy of that day had rooted itself into every policy, every protocol, every person. But for John Marshall, the transformation wasn't about headlines or hashtags. It was about memory, about why the seat mattered. And who had been forgotten before it. On a cool October morning, John stood at the edge of SkyPulse's new training campus, an open-air facility surrounded by runway views and layered with murals. One wall bore the names of over 1,700 passengers who had submitted testimonies after the incident. Another featured a single sentence etched in steel. "Respect has no dress code." Beside him stood Donald Ray, now head of equity training, and Layla Carter, newly appointed Chief Culture Officer. They watched as the first class of new flight attendants walked past the inscription, pausing to read the quote before entering. "They know," Donald whispered. "They feel it," Layla added. John just nodded. "They'll carry it." Meanwhile, in cities across the country, A movement had begun. Airlines quietly audited their internal communications. Employees started calling out favoritism. And at one gate in Houston, a white executive in a $1,000 suit was told, "Sir, we don't move people based on tips anymore." It was working. Not perfectly, but powerfully. Grace Kim's documentary, The Seat They Tried to Take, had premiered to global acclaim. The final scene showed a close-up of John's crumpled boarding pass pressed flat inside a museum glass case. Narration. It wasn't just paper, it was proof that sometimes the most powerful position is just sitting still while injustice exposes itself. Then came the most surprising legacy. A scholarship funded by former SkyPulse passengers and John himself. The SP204 Equity Fellowship dedicated to young people studying ethics, law, and organizational justice. Its motto: Hold the seat, speak the truth. On the one-year anniversary of Flight 204, SkyPulse hosted a remembrance flight, not a marketing stunt, but a live training event. The crew recruits from the new program, the passengers, every person displaced, disrespected, or dismissed on a flight in the past decade, flown first class, free of charge. And in seat 1A, no one. It remained empty, reserved in honor of all the times it had been unjustly taken. John didn't attend that flight. He didn't need to. He was at home, on his porch, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Legacy What's Left." When titles are gone. His phone buzzed. A message from Layla. Passenger Equity Index now public. 92% transparency rating. We did it. He smiled. Replied. We started. The people finished. And that's the moral, isn't it? That dignity shouldn't have to be earned through posture, fashion, or silence. That fairness isn't something elite. It's something expected. That when injustice sits in 1A, the entire flight feels it. But when truth sits there, everyone rises. And if you've made it to this point, this moment, ask yourself, how many people have been quietly removed, unseated, or overlooked simply because someone thought they didn't belong? What if the next time you see it, you speak? Because legacy isn't just built by leaders, it's carried by witnesses. This was never about first class. This was about first principles. And now, thanks to one man's silence turned storm, we all know dignity flies best when no one questions the boarding pass of another person's worth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.